Report the amendment.
An amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H-Res 863 offered by Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas, number 117.
The gentlelady is recognized to speak on her amendment.
Mr. Chairman, the Founding Fathers deliberated for a period of time to ensure that the American public for ages beyond would be protected. And so their interpretation of impeachment, which, by the way, to answer a question posed some many minutes and hours ago, yes, there is authority to do our job. Yes, impeachment does exist. As Professor Charles Black has indicated, it deals with other high crimes and misdemeanors. In particular, impeachment is focused on the idea of treason, bribery, high crimes and misdemeanors. Professor Black notes that in his influential handbook, impeachment is not permitted for mere inefficient administration or administration that does not accord with Congress' view of good policy. Simply put, the Constitution forbids impeachment based on policy disagreements between the House and the executive branch, no matter how intense or high stakes those differences of opinion are. I would venture to say that the disruption of a presidential election in 2020 was not a mere disagreement between Congress and the executive, a direct connection to disrupting the election and changing the election, nor was an outright insurrection on January 6th could be equal to the idea of a disagreement with Congress. And so what we have here today are two articles with no constitutional basis of charging a secretary or a public figure anything dealing with an unconstitutional violation. It has been 9 months since our committee's chair told his donors in Tennessee to, quote, get the popcorn, unquote, for his 5-phase predetermined plan to impeach a cabinet secretary over policy differences. Over 9 months, the hearings floundered. Not a shrivel of evidence of high crimes or misdemeanors. Why they wish to not read my amendment, which is to eliminate Article 1, because as our Secretary formerly of Homeland Security, of whom I worked with, has indicated, again, he emphasized, Secretary Chertoff, political and policy disagreements aren't impeachable offenses. To the American public, he made it as a simple statement of fact. The Constitution gives Congress the power to impeach federal officials for treason, bribery, and high crimes and misdemeanors. That is a high bar, and we do not have that. And now, after 2 impeachment hearings with no Republican-invited constitutional experts, my colleagues across the aisle have rushed to their pre-planned, predetermined conclusion to impeach Secretary Mayorkas. As I said earlier, this is revenge impeachment. I got you. That's despite Republicans not affording Secretary Mayorkas any rights to participate in the process, unlike the previous impeachments of former President Trump. They claim that the Secretary is playing a game of cat and mouse, but my Republican colleagues rejected the Secretary's offer to testify before the committee on a different day. He details that in a very effective, lengthy letter that, yes, we did receive in the early morning hours, but he did provide that with us, for us. A day where he was not already planning to host Mexican officials to do what our colleagues want him to do, the job of stopping fentanyl. The meeting was to collaborate on clamping down on fentanyl trafficking and reducing unlawful crossings. Isn't that interesting? Performing his constitutional duties, and he was rejected. And the chair of this committee did not act upon our properly entered Minority Day hearing request to call on constitutional experts to discuss this impeachment process. Republican attorneys general, masquerading as constitutional experts, don't provide an insightful view into the impeachment just a partisan one, but more importantly, they are not constitutional experts. They deal with the laws of their state, not the laws that we are governed by in the United States, Congress, or this committee in particular. They should be guided by the Constitution, inasmuch as states are subject to the power of the federal government that seems to be missing in several of our states today. But I guess Republicans consider the two impeachment hearings methodical. In light of these observations, my amendment seeks to strike Article 1 of the Articles of Impeachment. The article is filled with unsubstantiated allegations and a general lack of understanding of both historic border policy and U.S. immigration law. My colleagues want to impeach the Secretary for allegedly not enforcing immigration law.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
And I hope to continue by one of my colleagues yielding. At this time, I reserve what I did not have to reserve.
The gentlelady yields.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to withdraw my point of order.
Point of order is withdrawn. Does anyone want to speak on the amendment? No. Her amendment, Republicans go first. So is there a Republican? Nope. Okay. You're recognized, Mr. Magaziner, for 5 minutes to discuss the amendment.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll begin by yielding back to Ms. Jackson-Lee.
You're very kind, sir. Thank you so very much. Let me say that, again, my colleagues want to impeach the Secretary for allegedly not enforcing the immigration law. Be reminded, my colleagues, that he was attempting to meet with Mexican officials to enforce laws to determine what laws we could work on together, and which he could not be at this particular hearing and was not given another option. They seem not to understand that Congress provides the funding for and sets the minimum threshold for detention levels, and Congress has never provided the resources to detain all undocumented migrants. DHS is currently detaining more people than required by this body, while Republicans refuse to consider the Secretary's request for more funds to further increase the bed space. Similarly, Congress has never provided the resources to remove all eligible non-citizens. No administration have ever requested funding for such a large deportation scheme. We have not even tried to participate in legal, if you will, immigration by providing the necessary tools. I didn't say that they would all be granted for asylum. And so we have an extensive backlog in all forms of assessing the migrants coming across the border. Therefore, Secretary Mayorkas uses prosecutorial discretion in the absence of other tools in accordance with longstanding precedent, and rightly instructs the officers and agents to prioritize threats to public safety, national security, and border security as the American people would want them to do. How do you protect us, Mr. Secretary? Well, I've been given zero by this Congress. They've done nothing for comprehensive immigration reform, so I'm going to, in my best judgment, as a public servant, following the Constitution, doing my duty, try to ensure that you will have the opportunity to be safe. The prioritization doesn't stop him from enforcing the law. He's already removed and expelled more people than the Trump administration. My colleagues also want to impeach the Secretary for executing his parole authority in a way that aligns with decades of precedent. Every administration since Eisenhower has used parole. Its first use was actually for 30,000 Hungarian nationals fleeing communism. President Trump used parole to expedite the reunification of Cuban families facing long waits for immigrant visas. Now Republicans want to say it can't be used on a case-by-case basis for Ukrainians fleeing Russian aggression, or the multitude of different persons that are now coming across the border because, again, there was no stand-up Republican Party to provide the resources, stand up to the cause, to provide the resources that would allow for this Secretary to perform his job. My amendment affords my Republican colleagues to go back to the table for an opportunity to do their job and to correct their baseless allegations, of which I would care for them to adopt their own instructions. Secretary Chertoff said, that is why Republicans aren't seeking to hold Mr. Mayorkas to the Constitution's high crimes and misdemeanors standard for impeachment. They make the unsupported argument that he is derelict in his duty, and they have no basis to be able to suggest that. And Secretary Chertoff goes on to say, the truth is that our national immigration system is outdated, and DHS leaders under both parties have done their best to manage our immigration system without adequate congressional support. But no Democrat, during the time that we were in the majority, attempted to impeach our Secretaries of Homeland Security when they respectively had challenges and difficulties sending or returning migrants that were coming to this country. So let me, as I conclude, we have been executing, and this is by way of Secretary Mayorkas, but no one wants to listen to. We have been executing an unprecedented and high-impact campaign to disrupt, dismantle the smuggling organizations. More than 14,000 smugglers throughout the region have been arrested, and thousands have been prosecuted under federal law. We have worked with Mexico to conduct mirrored patrols along the southwest border, protection of the southwest border. And we have worked with Mexico and other countries to increase interdictions along the migratory routes, include repatriation flights, and execute the removal of third country nationals. Last year, we secured funding to hire 300 more Border Patrol. We scrapped and got whatever we could get.
Gentlelady, your time has expired,
And
but
so
I think
ask my
Mr.
colleagues
Thinidar is going to
support
yield to you.
the Jackson-Lee
Mr.
amendment
Thinidar,
to
you're
eliminate Article
recognized.
1. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield my time to the gentleman from Rhode Island.
Mr. Magaziner is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to Representative Tannadar. I want to speak in favor of Ms. Jackson-Lee's amendment. The legal case for impeachment in these articles is incredibly thin, and I want everyone to understand this. In Article 1, the argument that House Republicans are making is that somehow Secretary Mayorkas is choosing not to follow the law because a portion of migrants apprehended at the border are not being detained until their cases are heard. But again, there is not enough detention capacity because this Congress has not provided that funding for that capacity. Stats and numbers don't lie. For fiscal year 2024, and I want everyone to hear this, Congress provided funding for 34,000 beds in ICE detention centers, 34,000. The average daily population in those detention centers is 37,000 people. They are at capacity. So there may be individual examples of certain facilities at certain times that are not at capacity for safety reasons or health reasons or whatever the case may be. But overall, across the system, we are at and above capacity. And so what should the Secretary do? The Secretary, because he has not received the funding to provide adequate detention capacity, has to use his judgment for who to detain and who to release. That is not illegal. It is certainly not impeachable, and it is the exact same kind of discretion that every other director before him has used. In the last 2 years of the Trump administration, 52% of migrants apprehended at the southern border were released, not detained. 52%, nearly 1 million people. I did not hear my Republican colleagues trying to impeach the secretary or acting secretary under the Trump administration during those years, but here they are trying to impeach Secretary Mayorkas for doing the exact same thing. And in fact, the percentage of migrants who have been released under the Biden administration, 48%, is lower than the 52% rate under the last 2 years of the Trump administration. In Article 2, and that's, by the way, that is essentially their whole argument in Article 1, so we can forget that. Article 2, they are arguing that somehow the Secretary has lied to Congress because at various times he said things like the border was secure or the border was closed. These are subjective terms. Again, certainly not impeachable. If he said, you know, we're holding an average daily count of 37,000 people a day when it was really 10,000 a day, well, that would be a lie. That would be misstating a fact. But characterizing the situation on the ground in a way that my Republican colleagues might disagree with, is certainly not impeachable or a lie. If I say to you, it's hot outside and you think it's cold, I haven't lied to you. If I say to you it's 80 degrees and it's actually 40 degrees, well, that might be a lie.
Would the gentleman yield?
But I'll just say once again, you're talking about terms like closed, secure, that are inherently subjective terms. Oh, okay. I mean, there are certain terms like operationally secure that may have a legal definition, but again, the idea that this would be an impeachable offense is ludicrous. There is no law that my colleagues have pointed to that has been broken, and particularly when it comes to the Secretary using his discretion to decide how to manage the lack of capacity because Congress has not provided the resources that he has asked for. He's using the same discretion that every Secretary before him has used.
The gentleman yield quick for.
Yield to Mr. Goldman.
Just to follow up on Mr. Magaziner's point on the operational control of the border, as that term is defined in the Secure Fence Act of 2006, that, of course, requires 0 immigrants from crossing the border in order to achieve that standard. And of course, that's unreasonable, unattainable. So in 2007, under the Bush administration, the department issued guidelines to redefine what operational control is. So if you are actually trying to point to this and the letter of the law, then you ought to talk to your colleagues in the Wayback Machine in 2007 who changed that definition.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Would the gentleman yield? Would the
The
gentleman
gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Mrs. Greene for 5 minutes to comment on the amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're listening to Democrats today talk about Secretary Mayorkas requesting funding from Congress and talking about detention space. But the facts tell the truth. Secretary Mayorkas has requested less detention space. Fiscal year 2020, $2.7 billion for 54,000 beds, including 2,500 for family units. Fiscal year 2021, $3.1 billion for 60,000 beds, including 5,000 for family units. Fiscal year 2022, he requested $1.8 billion for 32,500 beds. Fiscal year 2023, he requested $1.4 billion for 25,000 beds. And in fiscal year 2024, Secretary Mayorkas reduced it again down to $1.3 billion for 25,000 beds. This is a reduction of 9,000 from fiscal year 23 enacted. DHS has not provided Congress with statutorily mandated reports on detention needs as required under 8 U.S.C. 1368 and requested by the committee in a letter on January 4th, 2024. Also, DHS claims in fiscal year 22 and 23 budget requests that a reduction in detention capacity level will not impede ICE's ability to apprehend, detain, and remove non-citizens that present a threat to national security, border security, and public safety. Secretary Mayorkas closed detention facilities, closed them, while paroling en masse millions of illegal aliens into our country. By December 2021, DHS stopped using family detention centers for family units. In March 2022, ICE announced it would close an Alabama detention facility and limit the use of 3 others in Florida, Louisiana, and North Carolina. Secretary Mayorkas refused to utilize MPP. But let's talk about what has been the result of that. Human trafficking is a $150 billion a year industry. And what has this done for the cartels? Cartels and coyotes are making over $13 billion a year in human trafficking alone off of Secretary Mayorkas's willful breaking of federal immigration laws. This revenue is 26 times more than cartels earned under President Trump, approximately $500 million under Trump, according to the New York Times. But what is that doing? This is trafficking children. trafficking women. This is what he is not holding these people. He is not detaining these people. He's not coming to us and asking us for more money. He's asking us for less money. He's asking us for less beds. And then he's closing down detention facilities. It is an outright lie to claim that Secretary Mayorkas is following the law when in fact he's not. He is breaking the law. And he is paroling them by the millions into the interior of the United States. What else has happened since then? Fentanyl, the #1 killer for Americans between ages 18 and 45. Let's also talk about how many Americans are dying. 300 Americans a day are dying. Let's talk about what that does to people like two of my constituents, Jose and Isabel Lerma, who were killed in a human smuggling pursuit caused by Mayorkas's open border policies. What about 20-year-old Kayla Marie Hamilton? Remember her mother? Poor Kayla was raped and strangled to death by an illegal MS-13 gang member who was actually apprehended at the border. Apprehended. He had gang tattoos on his body. But because Secretary Mayorkas breaks federal law, he says, go ahead and release these people into our country. And this 20-year-old was raped and murdered by an MS-13 gang member who should have never been in the United States. This is the outcome. That's just one example. We could spend hours and hours. You know what? We could go all week, and I'm sure Chairman Greene would let us do it if we talked about every American who has been affected by Secretary Mayorkas willfully breaking federal immigration law. Is that what we must do? If we must, we must. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
The gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. Payne for 5 minutes discussing the amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield to Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee.
Gentleman yields. Ms. Jackson-Lee.
I thank the gentleman, and forgive me, Mr. Magaziner, that I didn't thank you when you yielded. Thank you so very much. Let me give us all a suggestion. Let us move to adjourn this meeting and have an authorization meeting, because my heart goes out to every single victim that has suffered a loss of life, being a family member or who's died in this terrible scourge of drug trafficking or fentanyl. And let's have a meeting that deals with authorizing Secretary Mayorkas $20 billion to be able to do the job that we understand he has not done, because he has not asked for $1 billion, $2 billion, $5 billion, $6 billion, $7 billion. It goes to the very point that we are making. These are policy decisions. These are decisions that the Budget Committee participates in, the Appropriations Committee participates in. And it may be in the overall discussion of the budget of this nation or appropriations that the Secretary was given the amount that he could work with, policy. And it wasn't a constitutional decision. It was, this is the budget for DHS. And the billions that you are asking or maybe need will have to be dropped down. And so I can't for the life of me see why my colleagues cannot understand that you are dealing clearly with the issue of a policy decision and a very wise secretary that is trying to do his job by protecting us in the narrow way that he's allowed to do so. Here are my resources. Here is who I can detain. And for the information of this committee, many Republicans want to use our immigration and criminal justice system to solve public health crisis or blame the secretary. Under President Biden's leadership, overdose deaths have decreased or been flat each month for 6 consecutive months. As well, we have reported, based on a rolling 12-month count, with significant increases during the final year of the Trump administration, We didn't have that. With Democrats, we've been working to bring it down and to stop the scourge of drug trafficking. In September 2021, during the first year of the Biden administration, the DOJ and DEA announced law enforcement surge that resulted in the seizure of far more of these fentanyl pills and other horrible aspects. And so the real question is, how long are we going to pursue a question of behavior under your job versus direct acts that result in the deaths of people? Are you telling me Secretary Mayorkas was directly involved in killing people? Would we go to that length? Would we so much even suggest that the smugglers and the cartels gaining profits have now rendered unto Secretary Mayorkas under Article 2 that talks about the breach of trust? Or has he benefited monetarily? Who would want to stand and say that? And so we're getting to a point now where it really is a question of understanding. And that understanding is that Article 1 does not fit any of the charges that the Republicans are making against this gentleman. They're not constitutionally grounded. And we have not allowed the Secretary, who is now engaged in negotiations now for over a month, I believe, or more, with the Senate, a very table that the House Republicans have been invited to sit at, the very table that the Speaker of the House has been invited to sit at. And my understanding is that their seats are vacant. But yet our Secretary of Homeland Security, under the threat of impeachment, at every point has gotten up every day to participate in abiding by laws that he hopes will make this country safer. Is that the basis of impeachment? Is that the accusation that will hold under this Article 1? Mr. Chairman, it will not hold, and I ask my colleagues to support the Jackson-Lee Amendment and vote down Article 1.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
thank
I
you
now
for
recognize Mr. Guest for 5 minutes.
Tuesday,
to
the
discuss
13th of Feb, and just coming off the back of that, Sheila Jackson taking down Marge Clown, is something that President Biden has said today. He used the words, the extreme voices in the House, and I'm trying to work out, how did the House ever become a situation where it's home for just nut job, fruitcake, extreme views like Marjorie Taylor Greene? What actually happened? Did they slip through the net? Because there are circumstances, situations where it shouldn't always be politics, where it shouldn't always be political. But Marjorie Taylor Greene, to me, doesn't have the capability. She's always annoyed, huge chip on the shoulder, there's a cloud above her head all the time. What is going on? And if you had a choice, just a straight question, you can tell me in the comment section below, would you boot Marjorie Taylor Greene? Yes or a no?
The House is expected to have round 2 of their attempt to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary, today. Has the president been in touch with Democratic leadership about their efforts to block it? We know that every vote counts, so he's been checking in to make sure that all Democrats are actually going to get
So I can tell you, obviously, the Office of Legislative Affairs here, who deals directly with Congress, they're in regular touch with congressional members. I don't have any specific conversation that the president has had on this particular issue. Look, you know, and I've been saying this for the past couple of minutes. It's like the House Republicans need to do serious work that actually matter, work that's actually the American people care about. This is not it. The impeachment of Mayorkas. Let's not forget, Mayorkas played a big role in trying to get, when the border security conversation was happening, and there was a deal that came out of the Senate, a bipartisan negotiation deal. Secretary Mayorkas was very much involved in that, and we wanted to see meaningful change, and Republicans got in the way. They got in the way and didn't want to see that happen. Now they want to continue on the shameful process of impeaching him. It's baseless. It is baseless. And so, look, they should drop this. There's a bipartisan, bipartisan agreement that came for the national security supplemental. They should focus on that instead of doing another political stunt. So we're going to be, we're going to be forceful about that, and